Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are drifting into a world of candlelight, corsets, and impossibly complicated social codes, the age of Regency etiquette. A time when a woman could ruin her entire family standing by lifting a teacup half an inch too high, when a curtsy was measured like a science, and when simply existing in a drawing room required the stamina of a soldier and the patience of a saint. If you're new here, this channel exists purely to help you fall asleep. There's no need to remember any of this. No test in the morning. No trivia night depending on it. Just let my voice carry you through the quiet, slow-moving world of the past, while your body settles, your breathing softens, and your mind lets go of today. Before we begin, get comfortable. Turn the lights down low, maybe switch on a fan or a heater for that gentle background hum, and pull the blanket up around you. If you'd like, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy picturing all of you scattered across different time zones, drifting off together. Now, let's slip back roughly 200 years into a world of powdered ballrooms, whispered gossip, and rules so specific they govern the exact angle of a woman's eyebrows. Tonight, you are not you. Tonight, you are a young gentlewoman of the English Regency, somewhere between 1811 and 1820, living inside a rulebook nobody ever wrote down but everybody somehow knew by heart. Let's begin. The sound of morning you surface slowly from sleep, the way you always do in this house, drawn up out of dreaming by the soft scrape of curtain rings along their rod. Your maid has already been awake for an hour. She moves through your bedroom with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this every single morning of her working life. And within seconds the pale, buttery light of an English morning is spilling across your bedclothes. You do not sit up right away. You lie there a moment, feeling the weight of the goose feather mattress beneath you, listening to the small sounds of the house waking, a door somewhere below, the distant clatter of a kitchen, a bird outside the window that has clearly never heard of decorum. For this one brief moment you are simply a person. Nobody is watching. Nobody is judging the shape of your yawn. It will not last. Your maid turns toward the bed and you feel her gaze pass over you the way a shopkeeper might glance over the morning's stock. Not unkindly, she is fond of you in her way, but appraisingly. Hair in disarray. One shoulder of your shift slipped down in the night. A crease across your cheek from the pillow. All of it noted, all of it about to be quietly corrected. "Good morning, miss," she says, already reaching for the basin. You murmur something back, still half inside your dream, and attempt to sit upright. This is harder than it sounds. Feather mattresses have a talent for swallowing a person whole, and you sink several inches before you can find enough purchase to rise, wobbling upright with all the grace of someone climbing out of a rowboat. Your maid does not comment on this. She has seen it every morning for 2 years and has long since stopped finding it interesting. The room around you is soft and pastel, all sprigged wallpaper and white muslin drapes, the kind of room designed to look as though nothing difficult has ever happened inside it. It is, in its own quiet way, a kind of stage set, and you are about to become its performer for the day, dressing for the day before breakfast. Before a single word is exchanged with anyone outside this room, you must be assembled. That is really the only word for it. A Regency lady does not simply get dressed the way a person today might pull on whatever is nearest. Dressing is a small ceremony, performed daily, with an audience of one deeply committed maid. First comes the wash. A porcelain basin, a small jug of lukewarm water, a soft cloth. You dab at your face and throat, careful not to be too vigorous about it. Regency beauty standards prized a kind of untouched delicacy, skin that looked as though it had never once been exposed to hard work, sunlight, or effort of any kind. Scrubbing too energetically was, in its own small way, a betrayal of the image you were meant to project. Then the shift, fresh linen against skin still warm from sleep. Then stockings, tied above or below the knee depending on fashion and personal habit. And then the part of the morning that truly begins the transformation, the stays. Your maid holds them open, and you step into position, arms raised. The stays of this period were shorter and softer than the rigid corsets that would come later in the century, but they were still, unmistakably, a piece of engineering. Boned with whalebone or reed, laced up the back, designed to lift, support, and shape the body into the fashionable silhouette of the day. A high, rounded bust and a long, smooth line beneath it, echoing the columns of ancient Greece that so much of Regency fashion tried to imitate. The lacing begins gently. A test pull to gather the fabric. Then firmer, your maid's hands working quickly and practically, the way someone laces a boot rather than the way someone might handle something fragile. You feel your ribs draw inward, your shoulders ease back almost involuntarily, your spine straighten as though someone has quietly corrected your posture from the inside out. It is not agony. That particular myth belongs more to the later Victorian corset than to this looser Regency version. But it is unmistakably present. A gentle, constant reminder, laced into the very structure of your clothing, that you are being shaped into something. That your body this morning is not entirely your own. It belongs for the next several hours to fashion, to propriety, to the eyes of everyone you are about to meet. Over the stays goes a fine linen shift-like garment, and then the dress itself, a high-waisted muslin gown in a soft color, its skirt falling in a long, flowing column from just beneath the bust. It is, by the standards of the centuries before it, remarkably comfortable. Light fabric, minimal understructure, a waistline that sits nowhere near where your actual waist is. And yet comfort was never really the point. The point was the silhouette, elegant, upright, effortlessly composed, and the silhouette required its quiet sacrifices. Your hair comes last. Your maid works it into soft curls and coils, pinning it close to your head in the fashionable style of the day. A few loose ringlets left to frame your face as though they had simply fallen that way by accident. Nothing about a Regency lady's appearance was ever really an accident. Even the illusion of carelessness took 20 minutes and a great many pins. You catch your reflection in the small vanity mirror, powdered skin, soft curls. A dress the color of a robin's egg, and for a moment you almost don't recognize yourself. This is the version of you that is about to walk downstairs. Not quite a disguise, but not quite simply you either. Somewhere between the two, the first test of the day before you have even left your bedroom, the day's expectations have already made themselves known. Your maid steps back to look you over one final time, adjusting a fold of fabric here, smoothing a stray curl there, and gives a small nod of approval. The silent verdict that you are, for now, presentable. It occurs to you, as it occurs to you most mornings, that you have not yet spoken to a single other person today, and already you have been dressed, laced, arranged, and inspected. The performance of being a Regency lady does not begin when you walk through the drawing room door. It begins the moment your eyes open. You take one steadying breath, as steadying as the stays allow, and move toward the door. Somewhere below, you can already hear the soft clink of breakfast china being laid out, and beyond that, faintly, the first murmurs of a household beginning its day. Whatever this day holds, visitors, calls, perhaps an invitation to a private ball this evening. It will be measured, watched, and quietly recorded by everyone around you. But that is still a few minutes away. For now, you simply walk carefully down the narrow staircase, one hand trailing the banister, skirts held just slightly so you do not misstep. Outside the tall windows, the English countryside is waking up in soft gray light, and somewhere a rooster is announcing the morning with far more enthusiasm than anyone inside this house is permitted to show. Breakfast, when you finally reach it, turns out to be less about nourishment and more about restraint. The dining room glows with the same soft morning light that woke you, falling across a table laid with cold ham, boiled eggs, warm rolls, and a pot of tea strong enough to wake the entire household. It looks, on the surface, like an ordinary meal. It is not. You lower yourself into your chair the way you have been taught, back straight, knees together, hands folding neatly in your lap while a footman serves the first dish. Around you, other members of the household are already seated, and the unspoken rule settles over the table like a fine mist. Eat, but do not appear to need to eat. Hunger in this world is something a lady possesses privately and never, ever displays. You reach for a small roll and break it into pieces so tiny they might as well be crumbs. placing each piece delicately between your lips and chewing with slow, careful motion, as though the entire process were incidental to your being here rather than the actual point of breakfast. Across the table, someone reaches for a rasher of bacon, and you feel a flicker of quiet envy. Bacon crackles, and crackling announces itself. And anything that announces itself at the breakfast table draws exactly the kind of attention you have spent your whole morning trying not to attract. Conversation floats gently above the plates. The weather, a neighbor's health, whether the roads will be passable for this evening's ball. Nothing sharp, nothing opinionated, nothing that requires you to reveal anything at all about what you actually think. You contribute when it is safe to do so, a small comment about the fineness of the morning, offered between bites, and otherwise you simply listen, nod, and sip your tea with the careful, unhurried rhythm expected of you. The tea itself deserves its own quiet attention. It must be lifted without clatter, sipped without sound, and returned to its saucer with a softness that borders on reverence. A dropped spoon, a rattled cup, even a slightly too loud swallow can ripple through a breakfast table like a small scandal. You have learned, through years of practice, to drink an entire cup of tea as though you were barely drinking anything at all. By the time breakfast concludes, you have eaten perhaps a third of what your body actually wanted, said perhaps 4 full sentences, and performed an entire morning's worth of quiet self-discipline before the day has properly begun. You rise from the table when the others rise, murmur your thanks to the room in general, and prepare yourself for what comes next. The long, unbroken stretch of a Regency day, filled with visits, greetings, and the endless, precise choreography of being seen. That choreography begins almost immediately, the moment you step into the morning room where your mother and a small gathering of family friends have assembled. Every entrance into a room in this world requires a curtsy, and every curtsy requires a decision. How low, how long, how warm an expression to wear while performing it. These decisions must be made in the space of roughly 1 second, based on the rank, age, and temperament of the person you are greeting, and there is no written guide to consult in the moment, only years of quiet observation and the ever-present fear of getting it wrong. You greet your mother's particular friend, an older woman of considerable standing in the neighborhood, with a deep, respectful curtsy, knees bending in a slow, controlled descent back straight, chin level, skirts gliding outward in a soft arc around you. It is not simply a bow of the body. It is a small performance of the entire social order, a physical acknowledgement of exactly where you stand in relation to everyone else in the room. Too shallow, and you risk seeming disrespectful, even rebellious. Too deep, and you risk seeming anxious, overeager, unsure of your own place. You hold the position a beat longer than strictly necessary, feeling your thigh muscles register their quiet complaint and rise again with practiced smoothness. The older woman's expression does not change, but you catch, just barely, the faintest softening around her eyes, the closest thing to approval you are likely to receive this morning, and you'll take it. There will be many more curtsies before the day is through. To arriving guests. To departing guests. To acquaintances passed briefly in a hallway. To gentlemen who appear, as they so often do, seemingly out of nowhere, requiring their own particular blend of respectful distance and polite warmth. Each one slightly different in depth and duration, each one calculated in the half-second before your knees begin to bend, each one another small brick in the wall of your reputation. By mid-morning, the room has filled further with visitors, the daily ritual of morning calls, when acquaintances and half-acquaintances drift from house to house across the neighborhood, exchanging pleasantries that mean everything and nothing at once. You take your place among a small circle of young women near the window, teacups balanced, spines straight, and the conversation begins in earnest. It starts, as it always does, with the weather. Someone remarks that the morning has turned out finer than expected. Another agrees, adding a small observation about the state of the roads. You offer your own contribution, something about the breeze, vague enough to mean nothing, specific enough to prove you were paying attention, and the group nods in quiet approval. This is not idle chatter. This is practice. Every sentence exchanged in this room is a small rehearsal for the larger, higher-stakes conversations that will come later with suitors, with hostesses, with the mothers of eligible young men who are, even now, quietly assessing whether you might make a suitable daughter-in-law. The topics allowed in this circle are narrow and well understood without ever needing to be spoken aloud. Weather, health, a recent piece of music, the progress of someone's garden, never politics. Never anything that might reveal a strong opinion, because a strong opinion is, in this world, something like a loaded pistol, impressive to some, alarming to most, and never quite appropriate to bring out in mixed company. You have learned to speak in a way that sounds thoughtful while committing you to absolutely nothing, offering observations rather than judgments, agreement rather than argument. A young woman near you mentions the previous evening's musical performance. Diverting, she says, with a small, unreadable smile, and you find yourself wondering, as you often do, what she actually thought of it. Diverting could mean delightful. It could also mean tedious beyond belief. The word has been chosen precisely because it could mean either, and everyone in the circle understands this, and no one will ever ask her to clarify. This is simply how things are said here, sideways, softened, wrapped in enough ambiguity that no one can ever be caught having revealed too much. You take a slow sip of tea, using the pause to consider your own contribution, and offer a gentle remark about the violets blooming early this year. A small silence follows, just long enough for you to wonder if you have said something wrong, before another young woman agrees, and the conversation moves smoothly onward, like water finding its way around a stone. This is the quiet, exhausting work of being a Regency woman in company, saying enough to seem present, engaged, and pleasant, while revealing almost nothing of what you actually think or feel. An hour can pass this way, filled entirely with talk, and at the end of it you will remember almost nothing specific that was said, only the steady, careful rhythm of it, the sipping, the nodding, the soft murmured agreements, like a long, gentle tide that never quite reaches the shore. By the time the visitors begin to take their leave, your jaw aches faintly from the effort of maintaining a pleasant expression for so long, and your knees carry the quiet memory of a dozen careful curtsies. But you have done what was required of you. You have been seen and approved of, and nothing about your morning will give anyone cause for talk. In a world where reputation is currency, that quiet, uneventful success is its own small victory. The morning room slowly empties, teacups collected, chairs straightened, and for a brief moment you are left alone with your thoughts, the sunlight now fuller and warmer through the tall windows. Somewhere in the house, preparations are already beginning for the afternoon ahead, for the drawing room, the needlework, the careful architecture of an afternoon call. But for this one small, quiet moment, you simply sit, feeling the stays hold your spine straight whether you wish it or not, and let yourself breathe as deeply as the morning has allowed. The house continues its quiet motion around you, a door closing somewhere upstairs, a maid's footsteps crossing the hall, the distant sound of a horse and carriage arriving at a neighboring house. Regency mornings never truly end so much as fold seamlessly into afternoons, one obligation dissolving gently into the next without pause, without permission to simply stop and rest. You know this. You have always known this. And so, gathering your skirts, you rise from your chair, straighten the small wrinkles at your waist, and prepare yourself for whatever the afternoon intends to ask of you. The afternoon begins, as it so often does, in the drawing room, and if the morning room was a stage for gentle conversation, the drawing room is something closer to a battlefield disguised in floral upholstery. You step through its doorway and pause, just for a moment the way you always do, letting your eyes sweep the room before committing to a single step further inside. This pause is not hesitation. It is reconnaissance. Every chair in this room carries meaning that has nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with rank, relationship, and the delicate, unspoken architecture of who is currently in favor with whom. The seat nearest the fire belongs, by long unwritten tradition, to whichever matron currently holds the greatest authority in the room. The chairs along the window are neutral ground, safe for a young woman not yet sure where she stands. The small settee in the corner is where quiet alliances are formed, two women leaning their heads close together over needlework, trading confidences in voices pitched just below the general hum of conversation. You have learned, through months and years of small missteps and quiet corrections, to read a drawing room the way a sailor reads the sky, instinctively, quickly, and with the understanding that getting it wrong carries real consequences. Sit too close to the fire uninvited, and you risk seeming presumptuous, as though you believe yourself of higher standing than you are. Sit too far from the room's center, and you risk seeming aloof, unwilling to engage, perhaps even sulking. There is, somewhere in the middle of these two extremes, a correct chair. Today, it is offered to you by a small, deliberate gesture from the lady of the house, a slight incline of the head toward a modest chair near the window, neither too prominent nor too distant. You cross the room with even, measured steps, careful not to catch your hem on the carpet's woven pattern, and lower yourself into the chair with the particular grace that years of practice have carved into your body almost without your conscious thought. Knees together, back straight though not rigid, hands folded softly in your lap. You have arrived. You have been seated. The first small test of the afternoon has already quietly been passed. The discipline of sitting still. What follows next is something that would look, to a modern eye, almost comically simple. An afternoon of sitting in a chair. But sitting in Regency society is its own quiet discipline, one practiced and perfected from girlhood, and one that never truly stops asking something of you. The chair beneath you is not designed for comfort. Regency furniture, elegant as it looks, tends toward narrow seats and high, unyielding backs, built more to enforce posture than to relieve it. You settle into it and feel, almost immediately, the familiar quiet insistence of both the chair and your own stays working together to keep your spine upright. Slouching, even by half an inch, is not simply frowned upon. It is read, instantly and without mercy, as a sign of poor breeding, weak character, or worse, a lack of self-command. You have been taught since childhood that a lady's posture reveals as much about her inner discipline as her outward appearance. A straight back suggests a well-ordered mind. Round shoulders suggest laziness or indulgence, or, in the whispered language of drawing-room judgment, a household that failed to raise her properly. And so you sit, hour after hour, spine held in careful alignment, shoulders eased back, chin lifted to precisely the angle that suggests calm attentiveness rather than either boredom or excessive eagerness. It sounds, perhaps, like a small thing. It does not feel small by the third hour of an afternoon spent this way. Your lower back begins quietly to ache. Your shoulders, held so long in careful position, start to burn faintly with the effort of remaining exactly where they are meant to be. And still, none of this may show on your face. A lady in discomfort and a lady perfectly at ease must, to any onlooker, appear entirely identical. A footman enters with a fresh tray of tea, and the room performs its familiar small ritual of straightening further still, as though the mere appearance of refreshments demands an even higher standard of composure. You watch the tea being poured, watch each woman in the circle receive her cup with the same careful, practiced motion, wrist angled just so, saucer held steady beneath, cup lifted with fingers that never grip too tightly nor rest too loosely. When your own cup arrives, you lift it with the same measured care, careful not to let the porcelain clink against the saucer, careful not to tilt your head too far forward as you sip, careful, above all, not to let your spine curve even slightly out of its approved alignment in the process. It is, in its own strange way, a kind of quiet athletic feat, performing an entirely ordinary human action, drinking tea, while making it look as though your body requires none of the usual physical accommodations that action demands. Someone across the circle offers a gentle observation about the early blooming of the violets this spring. You respond with a small nod, careful to move only your head and not your shoulders, the motion so contained it barely qualifies as a nod at all. It is enough. In this room, the smallest gestures carry the most weight, precisely because anything larger would seem, somehow, like a loss of control. Calling cards and quiet calculations later in the afternoon, a footman enters bearing a small silver tray, and the mood of the room shifts instantly, subtly, the way a pond's surface changes just before rain. Calling cards have arrived, small rectangles of thick, embossed paper, each one representing a person, a family, a web of obligations and alliances that must now be carefully sorted. You lean forward just slightly to examine what has been left. 5 cards this afternoon, each one a small puzzle requiring its own particular response. The first from a family friend known for her gentle, uncomplicated nature. An easy visit to accept, promising nothing more taxing than tea and pleasant, undemanding conversation. The second from a woman of considerable social standing in the county, whose card is less an invitation than a summons. Declining it, even quietly, even with a perfectly reasonable excuse, would not go unnoticed, and would very likely be discussed, in careful, coded terms, at the next gathering she attends. The third card gives you pause. It bears a name you recognize immediately. A young woman whose friendship you have never quite been able to categorize. Warm in public, faintly competitive in private. The kind of acquaintance whose calling card might mean an offer of genuine friendship, or might mean something closer to reconnaissance, an attempt to see how you are faring this season relative to her own prospects. You cannot know which, not from the card alone. And so you set it aside for now, unresolved, the way one sets aside a difficult letter to answer when the mind is clearer. The fourth card belongs to a gentleman, not quite a suitor, not quite a stranger, occupying that particular uncertain territory that so many young men do at this stage of a Regency season. Accepting his visit means an afternoon of careful, closely supervised conversation, his mother very likely observing every word from a discreet distance, quietly assessing your suitability the way one might assess a horse at market. Posture, complexion, temperament, all silently tallied. Declining, meanwhile, risks being read as disinterest, and disinterest, once suspected, has a way of spreading through a social circle far faster than any spoken rejection ever could. The fifth and final card is the one that makes your stomach tighten slightly. It belongs to an older relation of considerable influence in local society, a woman known less for warmth than for the sharpness of her observations, and for a habit of taking a particular interest in young women she believes require improvement. An invitation from her is not really an invitation at all. It is closer to a summons, and there is no version of this afternoon in which you politely decline it. You spend the next several minutes sorting the cards into careful mental categories. Visits to accept gladly, visits to accept out of obligation, visits requiring further thought, and the one visit that requires no thought at all, only quiet resignation. Your mother's approval will be sought on at least 2 of these decisions before the day is through, and your own preferences, while not entirely irrelevant, will weigh rather less in the final outcome than you might wish. Once the sorting is complete, you move to the small writing desk near the window to compose your responses, brief, carefully worded notes, warm enough to seem gracious, restrained enough to commit you to nothing beyond the visit itself. Each note takes longer to write than its length would suggest, every sentence weighed and reconsidered because a note, unlike a spoken word, leaves evidence. It can be read aloud. It can be shared. It can, in the wrong hands or with the wrong phrasing, become the subject of exactly the kind of quiet gossip you have spent your entire day trying to avoid generating. You seal each note with a small drop of wax, pressed with the family's seal, and hand the small stack to a waiting footman, who will carry them to their respective households before evening falls. It is, in its own quiet way, an entire afternoon's worth of diplomatic correspondence, conducted over 5 small pieces of paper, and by the time it is finished you feel a faint, familiar weariness, the particular exhaustion of having spent real effort on something that, to an outside eye, would look like nothing at all. A turn about the room as the afternoon stretches onward. One of the young women in your circle rises and extends her arm toward you with a small, inviting smile. "Shall we take a turn?" she asks, and you rise to join her because a turn about the room, however ordinary it may sound, is rarely declined. It looks, To anyone glancing in from outside, like nothing more than two young women strolling arm in arm around the perimeter of a drawing room, pausing occasionally to admire a painting or exchange a quiet word. In practice, it is something closer to a carefully staged performance, watched, whether you wish it to be or not, by nearly everyone else present. Your steps must match hers precisely, neither rushing ahead nor lagging behind, the two of you moving as a single, synchronized unit around the edges of the room. Too quick a pace suggests restlessness, an eagerness to be elsewhere. Too slow suggests fatigue, or worse, a lack of genuine enjoyment in her company. You settle into the narrow, careful middle ground between the two, your skirts brushing softly against the carpet with each measured step. As you pass the small cluster of older women seated near the fireplace, you feel their attention shift toward you, subtle but unmistakable, an appraising glance here, a small exchanged look there. They are not simply watching you walk. They are assessing your posture, your bearing, the ease or unease with which you carry yourself in company, filing away small observations that may, weeks or months from now, resurface in a conversation about your suitability for this match or that one. Your companion murmurs a quiet remark about the fineness of the afternoon light through the tall windows, and you respond in kind, your voice pitched low enough to remain private between the two of you, while your bodies continue their slow, graceful circuit of the room. Somewhere near the pianoforte, a small cluster of young men glances over with the mild, polite curiosity of people watching something pleasant but not especially urgent, and you feel the familiar flicker of self-consciousness that comes with being, however briefly, the object of quiet observation. By the time you complete the full circuit and return to your seat, your legs carry a faint, unexpected ache, the particular fatigue of an activity that looks, from the outside, like gentle leisure, but that in fact demands a steady, sustained physical discipline all its own. A nearby matron leans toward you with a small, approving smile. "How pleasant a turn," she says, and you nod in polite agreement, saying nothing of the quiet effort it required, because to say so would rather defeat the entire purpose of having made it look effortless in the first place. As the tea trays are cleared and the afternoon settles into its quieter middle hours, the conversation in the drawing room shifts into something altogether different, softer in volume, but sharper in content. This is the hour when gossip, though never called by that name, moves gently but unmistakably through the room. Passed from woman to woman like a shared secret, everyone has silently agreed to pretend they are not sharing. You settle onto a small settee beside a young woman you have known since childhood, and she leans toward you with the particular closeness that signals a confidence is about to be offered. Her voice drops just below its usual register, not a whisper exactly, but pitched carefully for an audience of one. "Have you heard," she begins, "about the Ashworth boy? You have not." You arrange your expression into something attentive but unbothered, the careful neutral curiosity that Regency conversation demands. Too eager and you seem starved for scandal. Too indifferent and you risk being left out of whatever comes next, cut from the quiet circulation of information that, in this world, functions almost like currency. So you settle for a small, encouraging tilt of the head, and she continues, delighted to have found a willing audience. Around the room, similar small exchanges are taking place in every corner. Two older women near the window discuss, in hushed and faintly scandalized tones, a neighboring family's decision to reduce the number of guests at their upcoming assembly. A cluster of young ladies near the pianoforte trade opinions, carefully coded as observations rather than judgments, about a recent engagement announcement that has apparently surprised absolutely everyone except, it seems, the two people actually getting engaged. Nothing said in this room would sound, to an outside ear, like gossip exactly. Everything is phrased as concern or curiosity or simple observation, and yet every woman here understands perfectly well what is actually happening. Information is being gathered, weighed, and quietly filed away for later use. You listen more than you speak, nodding at appropriate intervals, offering the occasional soft exclamation of mild surprise, careful never to reveal too much of your own opinion on any of it. A well-placed silence, you have learned, is often more valuable than a well-placed word. It commits you to nothing, while still allowing you to remain, quite comfortably, inside the circle of the informed. By the time the hour draws to a close, you know a dozen small facts you did not know an hour ago: who danced with whom at the last assembly, whose mother is said to be quietly displeased with a recent match, whose new bonnet has already drawn comment for being perhaps a touch too fashionable for a country parish. None of it, strictly speaking, matters to you directly, and yet all of it will matter in small ways over the coming weeks. A piece of context here, a warning there, the kind of quiet social intelligence that helps a young woman navigate a world with no written rulebook, only the accumulated, whispered knowledge of everyone who came before her. A conversation, closely supervised not long after, a gentleman is announced, and the temperature of the room shifts again, subtly but unmistakably, the way it always does when a man enters what has, until that moment, been an entirely female space. He crosses the room toward you with the particular measured walk gentlemen of this era seem trained into from boyhood, unhurried, deliberate, giving the room ample time to notice his approach. Beside you, your chaperone straightens almost imperceptibly, her spine finding an extra half-inch of height, her expression sliding into the watchful neutrality of someone preparing for careful, active supervision. He bows. You curtsy. The greeting itself takes perhaps 3 seconds, and yet it feels, in the way of so many things this era, weighted with far more significance than its brevity would suggest. "I hope this afternoon finds you well," he says, and you answer that indeed it does, thank you, and hope the same in return. It is, on its surface, nothing at all the kind of exchange that could happen between any two strangers passing on a street, and yet you are acutely aware, as you speak, of your chaperone's presence at your side, close enough to intervene at the faintest hint of impropriety, far enough to allow the pretense of a private conversation. He asks whether you enjoyed the previous evening's musical performance. You answer that you did, very much, and offer a small, safe observation about the skill of the violinist. Your chaperone's eyes flick briefly toward you at the mention of the word skill, perhaps wondering in her careful, watchful way whether admiration for a musician's talent might somehow, through some obscure social alchemy, translate into admiration for something else entirely. You do not think it will. She is not entirely convinced. The conversation continues in this careful, shallow register: weather, music, the fineness of the neighborhood gardens, each topic chosen precisely, because it offers no possible avenue toward anything resembling genuine intimacy. You find yourself, despite the topic's blandness, rather enjoying his company. There is an easy warmth in his manner that the strict formality of the conversation cannot entirely suppress. But you are careful throughout to keep your own warmth carefully rationed, offered in small, measured doses rather than freely given, because freely given warmth in this world carries implications you are not yet prepared to make. He mentions, toward the end of the conversation, that he hopes to see you at the assembly later this week. You reply that you hope so as well, and something in his expression softens slightly at this, a small crack in the careful formality both of you have been maintaining. Your chaperone, sensing the shift, takes a small step closer, and he seems to understand the signal perfectly, straightening slightly and offering his farewells with practiced ease. He bows once more. You curtsy once more, and as he departs, your chaperone exhales quietly, the particular exhale of someone who has successfully prevented an imagined catastrophe that, in truth, was never especially close to occurring. "Very proper," she murmurs, adjusting her gloves, and you allow yourself a small, private smile, because in this world, an entirely uneventful conversation with a pleasant young man counts, genuinely, as a success worth quiet celebration. The embroidery hoop the late afternoon settles into needlework, the quiet, steady occupation that fills so many hours of a Regency woman's day. You take up your hoop, your thread, your small, sharp needle, and settle into the particular stillness that embroidery demands, a stillness that looks, from the outside, like peaceful leisure, and that in fact requires close, sustained concentration. Around you, the other young women in the room have taken up their own projects, a spray of roses here, a small pastoral scene there, and the room falls into the soft, companionable quiet of shared, careful work. You draw your needle through the fabric, checking the tension of each stitch, working slowly toward the small cluster of flowers taking shape beneath your hands. It occurs to you, as it often does during these long stretches of needlework, that this quiet skill is not merely a pleasant pastime but a kind of quiet examination, one that never officially ends. Your stitches must be even, your colors harmonious, your overall design pleasing without being ostentatious. Too elaborate a piece suggests vanity, too simple suggests a lack of application. Somewhere in the careful middle ground between the two lies the correct impression. A young woman of taste, patience, and appropriately modest accomplishment. A matron passes behind your chair and pauses to examine your work, murmuring a small, approving comment about the evenness of your tension. It is, in its own small way, high praise, and you feel a brief flush of quiet satisfaction before returning your attention to your needle, careful not to let the compliment show too plainly on your face. Pride, like so many other emotions in this world, is best kept discreetly out of sight. A book. Carefully disguised later still, when the room's attention has drifted elsewhere, you allow yourself a small, private indulgence. A novel, its plain cover slipped inside the covers of an approved volume of sermons, angled carefully to catch the afternoon light without revealing its true nature to anyone glancing your way. This is not officially forbidden. No rule anywhere states in writing that a young woman may not read novels. And yet novels carry a quiet reputation in this world, associated, fairly or not, with excessive sentiment, dangerous imagination, ideas about love and choice that polite society would rather young women encounter only within the safe confines of fiction, if at all. And so you read carefully, discreetly, turning pages beneath the cover of your sermon with the practiced ease of someone who has done this many times before. The story unfolding beneath your fingers involves a heroine standing at a cliff's edge, weighing duty against desire, wind pulling at her hair as she contemplates a decision no Regency woman of your acquaintance would ever be permitted to make so openly. You feel your pulse quicken slightly at the drama of it, and you glance up briefly to make certain no one has noticed your absorption. Across the room, a friend catches your eye and offers the smallest, knowingest of smiles she has recognized, from the particular thickness of your sermon, exactly what you are really reading. Neither of you says a word. A silent understanding passes between you instead, the quiet solidarity of two young women who have both discovered that fiction offers a small, private freedom the rest of the day rarely allows. You return to your book, savoring a few more stolen paragraphs before duty calls you back to the visible, public performance of the afternoon. It is a small rebellion, entirely undetectable to the wider room, and yet it feels, in its quiet way, like one of the few moments all day that genuinely belongs to you alone. As the afternoon light begins its slow amber decline through the tall windows, the household shifts its attention toward the evening ahead. Tonight brings an assembly, one of the season's private balls, hosted at a neighboring estate, and the preparations for it begin hours before a single carriage wheel ever turns toward the door. Your maid appears in your room not long after you have finished your needlework, already carrying an armful of fresh linen, and the evening gown selected earlier in the week after careful, lengthy deliberation. Dressing for a ball is not simply dressing more elaborately than usual. It is an entirely different category of preparation, one that treats your appearance not as a private matter but as a public statement about your family's standing, your own taste, and whether you wish it or not, your availability on the season's unofficial marriage market. The gown itself is a pale ivory silk, high-waisted in the fashionable style, its short sleeves trimmed with delicate lace, the skirt falling in a long, soft column that catches the candlelight in a way the plain muslin of your daytime dresses never quite manages. Your maid helps you into it with practiced care, smoothing each fold into place, adjusting the small train that whispers along the floor behind you as you move. Your hair receives even more attention than usual tonight, curled, pinned, woven through with a delicate ribbon that matches the trim of your gown. A few soft curls left loose to frame your face in the fashionable, artfully careless style that takes, in reality, the better part of an hour to achieve. Your maid works with quiet concentration, occasionally stepping back to assess her progress with the critical eye of an artist reviewing a half-finished portrait. By the time she finishes, you barely recognize the reflection in your vanity mirror. The soft candlelight of your bedroom catches the pale silk of your gown, the careful arrangement of your hair, the faint shimmer of a small string of pearls at your throat, and for a moment you allow yourself to simply admire the result before the familiar undercurrent of nerves reasserts itself. Tonight is not simply an evening of pleasure. Tonight is another performance, perhaps the most closely watched of the entire week, and you know it. Arrival at the ball. The carriage ride to the assembly passes in a haze of quiet anticipation, your mother offering last-minute reminders beside you. Remember to smile, but not too broadly. Remember to dance only when properly asked. Remember that Mrs. Ashworth will very likely be watching closely tonight, given the recent talk about her son. You nod along to each instruction, only half listening, your attention drifting instead to the soft glow of lights ahead as the carriage draws nearer to the grand house hosting tonight's assembly. Stepping down from the carriage, you feel the cool evening air against your bare arms, and for a brief moment, standing at the base of the wide stone steps, you allow yourself a single steadying breath before beginning the climb toward the brightly lit entrance. Inside, the sound of a string quartet drifts out to greet you, along with the low, warm hum of dozens of conversations already underway. The ballroom itself, when you finally step inside, takes your breath away every time, no matter how many times you have seen it before. Candles blaze in crystal chandeliers overhead, their light multiplied 100-fold in the tall mirrors lining the walls. The polished floor gleams beneath the shifting movement of silk and satin, dozens of guests already gathered in small, elegant clusters, their voices blending into a soft, continuous murmur beneath the music. You take your place near the edge of the room, beside your mother and chaperone, and begin the familiar work of the evening, watching, being watched, waiting to see who will approach and who will not, cataloging, almost without meaning to, which young women have already secured partners for the first dance and which are still, like you, standing quietly at the room's edge in hopeful anticipation. The first dance. It does not take long. A young gentleman of your acquaintance crosses the room toward you with the particular deliberate walk of someone who has been building his courage for several minutes, and bows before you with careful formality. Might I have the honor of this dance? You accept with a small curtsy, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves as he leads you toward the forming line of dancers. Around you, other couples are taking their places, the room arranging itself into the neat, orderly rows that Regency dancing requires, a far cry from anything resembling the closeness of later eras waltzes. Here, partners stand at a respectful distance, hands meeting only briefly during specific figures of the dance, the entire performance a carefully choreographed exercise in controlled, decorous interaction. The music begins, and you step forward into the familiar pattern, advance, retreat, turn, exchange partners briefly down the line before returning to your own. Your feet move through steps practiced since childhood muscle memory carrying you through the pattern, even as your mind remains alert to every small detail. The distance between yourself and your partner, the angle of your chin, the pleasant but not overly warm expression you must maintain throughout. It is, despite its formality, genuinely enjoyable. The music, the movement, the brief, charged moments when your hand meets his during a turn before parting again. You feel your cheeks warm slightly with the exertion, careful not to let it show too plainly, careful to maintain the appearance of effortless grace even as your heart beats quicker beneath your stays. Around the edges of the dance floor, the watchful eyes of matrons and chaperones track every movement with quiet, practiced attention. A dance is never simply a dance in this world. It is a small, public demonstration of compatibility, grace, and depending on how the evening unfolds, perhaps something more significant still. Two dances with the same partner in one evening draws notice. Three all but announces an understanding to the entire room. When the dance concludes, you and your partner exchange a final formal bow and curtsy, and he escorts you back toward your chaperone with polite, careful conversation, thanking you for the pleasure of the dance before withdrawing to allow you a moment's rest. Your chaperone leans close as he departs. "Very nicely done," she murmurs, and you feel a small, private glow of satisfaction at having navigated the evening's first significant test successfully. The pianoforte. Later in the evening, during a lull between dances, your hostess approaches with a request you have been quietly dreading all night. Would you be willing to play something for the room? There is no truly acceptable way to decline such a request without appearing either falsely modest or genuinely unaccomplished. And so you rise, smooth your skirts, and make your way toward the pianoforte positioned near the room's far wall, aware of the room's attention shifting, subtly but unmistakably, in your direction. You settle onto the bench, arrange your gown with careful precision, and place your hands on the cool ivory keys, feeling the familiar flutter of performance nerves settle into your chest. The room has not gone entirely silent. Conversation continues in low murmurs throughout, but you can feel, nonetheless, the quiet attention of dozens of eyes upon you, waiting to see whether you will prove yourself accomplished, mediocre, or, worst of all, unpleasantly ambitious in your display. This last possibility looms largest in your mind as you begin to play. A piece too impressive, too technically demanding, risks appearing as though you are trying too hard to draw attention to your own talents, an impression that could easily be read as immodest, even threatening, particularly among the mothers of other young women present tonight. And so you choose, deliberately, a piece well within your abilities, pleasant and melodic without straying into anything resembling genuine virtuosity. Your fingers move across the keys with practiced ease, the familiar melody filling the room with a light, agreeable sound. Partway through, you feel a small flourish of confidence and allow yourself a brief, slightly more elaborate passage than you had originally intended, only to catch, from the corner of your eye, a faint tightening in your mother's expression, and you deliberately soften your playing again immediately afterward, restoring the careful, unremarkable balance the room seems to expect of you. By the piece's conclusion, the room offers polite, measured applause, the particular kind that acknowledges competence without inviting further comparison to anyone else's talents. You rise, curtsy, and return to your seat with the quiet relief of a task completed adequately, if not spectacularly, which is, in this world, very often the wisest outcome to aim for. A flower and what it means. Later still, as the evening deepens and the candles burn lower in their sconces, a young gentleman approaches you during a break between dances, holding, rather awkwardly, a single pale pink rose. You recognize him immediately, the same young man who spoke with you so carefully in the drawing room earlier this week, his conversation supervised closely by your chaperone even then. Tonight, his approach carries an unmistakable weight, and you feel your pulse quicken as he extends the flower toward you with a small, formal bow. "I thought you might like this," he says, his voice carrying just enough uncertainty to suggest the gesture means rather more to him than his careful, measured tone lets on. You accept the flower with as much composure as you can manage, your fingers brushing his for the briefest possible moment as the stem passes between you. A flower in this world is never simply a flower. It carries meaning, weight, the quiet suggestion of feelings too significant to state outright in the middle of a crowded ballroom. You tilt your head slightly in acknowledgement, careful to convey warmth without anything approaching overt encouragement, aware, even now, of your chaperone's watchful presence a few steps behind you. "How kind," you reply, settling on the safest possible response, one that thanks him without committing you to anything further. He seems to understand the careful balance of your words perfectly, offering a small, pleased smile before venturing a further question, whether you might save him a dance later in the evening, perhaps the supper dance, should your card not already be full. You glance briefly at your near-empty dance card and reply that you believe you might have a space remaining, delivered with just enough warmth to suggest genuine interest, without straying into anything resembling open enthusiasm. He bows once more, clearly pleased, and withdraws to allow you a moment's composure. Your chaperone steps closer immediately, her expression a careful mixture of approval and vigilance. "A very pretty gesture," she says quietly, taking the rose gently to have it placed in water for you, and you feel, watching her carry it away, a small, private thrill entirely disproportionate to the size of the flower itself. The language of the fan. As the evening wears on, and the ballroom grows warmer with the heat of so many bodies and so many candles, you find yourself relying more and more on the small lace fan hanging from your wrist, not merely for its cooling function, but for the entire silent language it carries within Regency society, a language every young woman learns without ever being formally taught its rules. An open fan held near the face suggests interest in continuing a conversation. A fan snapped shut communicates displeasure, sharp and immediate, without a single word needing to be spoken. Drawn across the cheek, it signals affection, a gesture bold enough that you use it rarely, and only with the greatest care. Even the simple act of fanning yourself too quickly, you have learned through past small embarrassments, can be misread as a signal of romantic interest rather than mere physical warmth. Tonight, standing near a group of acquaintances, while the young man from earlier lingers nearby, you find yourself acutely conscious of every small motion of your wrist, aware that a moment's carelessness could send an entirely unintended message, rippling through the watchful eyes of the room. You keep your fan movements deliberately restrained, offering only the smallest, safest gestures, mindful that even something as delicate as lace and silk can, in this world, carry the weight of an entire unspoken conversation. Supper and the quiet wait of the evening. When supper is finally announced, the room shifts into a new configuration, couples pairing off to make their way toward the adjoining dining room, where a long table has been laid with cold meats, fruit, small cakes, and the particular abundance reserved for a private ball. The young gentleman from earlier offers his arm, as promised, and you accept it with careful, practiced lightness, aware of your chaperone's presence close behind as the two of you make your way toward the table together. Conversation over supper remains as carefully bounded as it has been throughout the evening, pleasant, light, entirely free of anything resembling genuine vulnerability. And yet beneath the surface of polite small talk, you sense something warmer passing between you, an ease in his manner that the strict formality of the evening cannot entirely suppress, and you find yourself, despite every careful lesson in restraint, genuinely enjoying his company. By the time the carriage finally arrives to carry you home, the candles in the ballroom burning low, the musicians beginning to pack away their instruments, you feel the particular, familiar exhaustion of a Regency evening well spent, legs aching faintly from dancing, jaw tired from hours of careful, measured smiling, and yet, beneath it all, a small, genuine warmth at the memory of a rose, a dance, and a conversation that, for once, felt like rather more than mere performance. The carriage rocks gently along the darkened country road, its wheels finding every small rut and stone in a rhythm that has become, over the years, almost soothing to you. Beside you, your mother has fallen into a comfortable, satisfied silence, and you suspect she is already composing in her mind the small report she will deliver to your father over breakfast tomorrow, who danced with whom, who wore what, and most importantly, what progress, if any, has been made regarding your own prospects this season. You rest your head lightly against the carriage window, watching the dark shapes of hedgerows slide past in the moonlight, and allow your thoughts to drift back over the evening. The rose, now carefully wrapped and resting in your lap, catches a faint gleam of moonlight with each small jolt of the carriage. You find your fingers straying to its petals more than once during the ride home, a small, private gesture that would mean nothing to anyone watching and everything to you. By the time the carriage draws up before your own front steps, the house is dark except for a single candle left burning in the hall, and you climb down with legs still faintly trembling from an evening of dancing, standing, and careful, sustained composure. Your maid is waiting, as she always is, no matter the hour, ready to begin the quiet, welcome process of undoing everything the evening required of you. The unlacing of your stays, when it finally comes, arrives like a small mercy. You feel your ribs expand outward with each loosened cord, your lungs drawing breath more freely than they have in hours, and for a moment you simply stand still in your bedroom, eyes closed, savoring the sensation of your body being, briefly, entirely your own again. Your maid works quickly and quietly, easing you out of your gown, brushing the elaborate curls from your hair until they fall soft and loose around your shoulders, and by the time you finally climb into bed, the day's-long performance has been folded away like the gown itself, hung carefully for tomorrow, waiting. You lie in the darkness for a long while before sleep finally claims you, replaying small fragments of the evening, the particular warmth in his voice when he thanked you for the dance, the careful way you angled your fan, the small approving nod from your chaperone as the carriage pulled away. Somewhere in the replaying, exhaustion finally overtakes you, and you drift into a sleep untroubled for once by any anxious rehearsal of tomorrow's obligations. A new day, a new household. Morning arrives, as it always does, with the soft scrape of curtain rings and the quiet, familiar presence of your maid moving through the room. Today brings no ball, no assembly, but something in its own way just as demanding. A formal visit to the household of Lady Harrington, whose particular standing in the county makes any call upon her something closer to an examination than a social pleasantry. You dress with even more than the usual care, your maid selecting a walking dress in a soft dove gray, modest but well cut, the kind of garment that says, without a single word, that you understand precisely the tone such a visit requires. Nothing too bright, nothing too plain, nothing that could possibly be read as either overreaching or careless. The carriage ride to Lady Harrington's estate passes largely in silence, your mother offering the occasional reminder, remember to admire the gardens, should the topic arise. Remember that Lady Harrington's youngest daughter is said to be recovering from a recent illness, and any inquiry after her health should be phrased with appropriate delicacy. Remember, above all, that today is not a day for opinions of any kind. When the carriage finally draws up before the grand front steps of the house, you feel the familiar tightening in your chest that precedes any visit of real social consequence. A footman opens the door before you have even reached it. They have, of course, been watching from the windows, as is customary, and you step inside a hallway so grand, so carefully appointed, that it seems designed specifically to remind every visitor of exactly how far below its standard they currently stand. The drawing room, when you are finally shown into it, is a masterclass in quiet intimidation. Rich furnishings, an enormous gilt-framed mirror reflecting the room's already considerable grandeur back upon itself, and a small cluster of women seated with the kind of easy, practiced elegance that only decades of social dominance can produce. You curtsy upon entering, offering the deep, respectful bow appropriate to a household of this standing, and feel Lady Harrington's eyes sweep over you with the swift, comprehensive assessment of someone who has spent a lifetime evaluating young women exactly like you. "Do sit," she says, gesturing toward a chair that is neither too close to her own seat, which would suggest presumption, nor too far, which would suggest a lack of confidence. It is, you realize, precisely the correct chair, chosen for you with the same careful calculation you might have applied yourself, had you been given the choice. Tea arrives shortly after, poured from a service so fine you find yourself holding your cup with even more than the usual caution, aware that a single chip or crack in this particular household's china would represent a catastrophe of considerable proportions. The conversation that follows moves through its familiar, well-worn channels: the fineness of the weather this season, a polite inquiry after your family's health, a brief, carefully neutral mention of last night's assembly, delivered by Lady Harrington with just enough curiosity in her tone to make clear she is aware, in considerable detail, of exactly who danced with whom. You answer each question with practiced care, offering enough detail to seem forthcoming, careful never to volunteer anything beyond what has been specifically asked. When the topic of last night's ball arrives at your own dancing, you mention, briefly and without elaboration, that you enjoyed several pleasant dances, allowing Lady Harrington to draw her own conclusions from your careful vagueness, rather than offering her anything concrete enough to repeat elsewhere. A plate of small biscuits circulates the room, and you take one, the smallest available, nibbling at its edges with the particular restrained delicacy the setting demands. Around you, the other women continue their own careful performances. A compliment here, a subtly competitive remark about a mutual acquaintance's garden there, the whole room humming quietly with the particular tension of women who like one another well enough, but who are also always quietly measuring one another against an unspoken and ever-shifting standard. By the time your visit draws to its natural close, signaled by a subtle shift in Lady Harrington's posture, a small tightening of the conversation's pace that experienced visitors learn to recognize instantly, you rise, offer your farewell curtsy with the same careful depth as your greeting, and make your way back toward the waiting carriage with the distinct, familiar sensation of having successfully passed an examination whose exact criteria were never once explained to you. Once safely inside the carriage and moving away from the house, you allow yourself a small, private exhale, your shoulders dropping half an inch from their carefully maintained position. Your mother beside you offers a small, satisfied nod. "That went very well, I think," she says, and you find yourself agreeing, though you remain even now not entirely certain what specific criteria determined that particular verdict. Preparing for dinner. The afternoon dissolves gradually into evening, and with it comes preparation for the day's final significant obligation, a formal dinner at the home of family friends, an event considerably more intimate than last night's grand assembly, but no less demanding in its own particular way. Dinner, in Regency society, operates according to a code of conduct so intricate that entire childhoods are spent absorbing its rules almost by osmosis, long before any young woman is old enough to actually attend such an event herself. You have watched for years from the edges of rooms and the tops of staircases, observing how the adults around you navigate the elaborate choreography of a formal meal. And tonight, as on every night you attend such a dinner, you find yourself grateful for every hour of that quiet, early observation. Your gown for the evening is more restrained than last night's ballroom silk, a rich, dark green suited to the intimacy of a smaller gathering, and your hair is arranged with slightly less elaborate ornamentation, appropriate to an evening among familiar company rather than the wider public display of an assembly. Still, no detail is entirely without consideration. Even the smallest, most private dinner among friends carries its own quiet expectations, and you have learned never to mistake familiarity for a license to relax your guard entirely. The carriage delivers you to the modest but elegant home of your hosts just as the last light is fading from the sky, and you are shown into a drawing room already filled with the low hum of pre-dinner conversation. You greet each guest in turn, your curtsy calibrated with the same careful precision as always, though tonight's gathering, smaller, more familiar, allows for slightly warmer expressions than the formal distance of Lady Harrington's drawing room required. The long table. When dinner is finally announced, the assembled guests move through to the dining room in a specific, carefully predetermined order, rank and precedence dictating precisely who enters first, who is seated nearest the host, who finds themselves, as you do tonight, in a perfectly respectable but unremarkable position roughly midway down the table's considerable length. The table itself stretches before you, draped in linen so white and so carefully pressed it seems almost to glow in the candlelight, set with an array of cutlery that would, to anyone unfamiliar with its logic, appear utterly bewildering. Multiple forks of subtly different sizes, knives whose specific purposes are distinguished by only the slightest variation in blade shape. Spoons positioned with an exactness that assumes, correctly, that every guest at this table has spent years learning precisely which piece of silver corresponds to which course. You settle into your seat as a footman draws back your chair, and allow your eyes to drift briefly toward the woman seated nearest the head of the table, a reliable, time-tested strategy for navigating any unfamiliar arrangement of cutlery. Whatever fork she reaches for first, you will reach for as well, a fraction of a second behind, trusting her experience to guide your own uncertain hand. The first course arrives, a delicate soup, fragrant and pale, ladled with careful precision into shallow bowls before each guest. You lift your spoon at precisely the angle etiquette demands, dipping it away from yourself into the soup before bringing it to your lips without the faintest whisper of sound. Soup, you have learned through long practice and the occasional mortifying childhood lesson, is perhaps the most treacherous course of any formal dinner. A single ill-timed slurp capable of drawing exactly the kind of quiet, disapproving attention no young woman wishes to attract at a dinner table. Conversation flows gently around you as the meal progresses, moving through its familiar, well-worn topics. A gentleman, too, seats down describing, at rather greater length than strictly necessary, the recent improvements to his estate's drainage system. A woman across the table offering a careful, diplomatically vague opinion about a recent piece of local news. Your own contributions kept, as always, light, agreeable, and entirely free of anything resembling a strong personal position. The courses continue their measured procession: fish, delicately sauced, a small portion of roasted fowl, vegetables arranged with an artistry that seems almost wasted on food destined to be eaten in such carefully restrained portions. You cut each piece into segments smaller than strictly necessary, chew with slow, deliberate discretion, and pace your consumption carefully against the rhythm of the table around you, never finishing a course too far ahead of your neighbors, never lagging so far behind that your plate remains conspicuously full when the footmen begin clearing. Halfway through the meal you catch, from the corner of your eye, a gentleman across the table enjoying his portion with rather more open enthusiasm than the room's careful restraint generally permits. And you notice, too, the small, almost imperceptible exchange of glances between two matrons nearby, a silent, shared judgment passed without a single word spoken aloud. You make a private mental note to be certain your own enjoyment of the meal, however genuine, never crosses quite so visibly into view. Dessert arrives near the meal's conclusion, a light, delicately flavored custard, easy to eat with the same measured restraint the rest of the meal has demanded. And you allow yourself, finally, the smallest hint of genuine pleasure in its sweetness, careful still to keep your expression composed rather than openly delighted. By the time the final course is cleared, and the ladies rise to withdraw to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port and conversation, you feel the particular, familiar fatigue of an evening spent in sustained, careful performance. Not physically exhausting in the way a ball's dancing might be, but mentally taxing in its own quiet, persistent way, every gesture and word measured against a standard that is never spoken aloud, only absorbed. Over years, through careful and constant observation. Withdrawing to the drawing room. The ladies settle into the drawing room with the particular ease that comes from having successfully navigated the meal's various small challenges, and conversation grows slightly warmer, slightly more relaxed, in the absence of the gentleman's presence. Tea is poured once more, and you find yourself part of a smaller, more intimate circle of conversation, the topics drifting toward matters slightly more personal than the careful neutrality maintained at the dinner table itself. A married woman a few years your senior asks, gently, whether you enjoyed last night's assembly, and you find yourself in this smaller, warmer setting, offering slightly more detail than you might have risked in a larger gathering. A mention of the rose, delivered with careful casualness, though you cannot entirely suppress the small warmth that colors your voice as you describe it. The women around you exchange a few small, knowing glances, and one offers a gentle, teasing observation about young men and their flowers, delivered with enough warmth that you find yourself laughing genuinely, if quietly, for the first time all evening. It is a small, welcome relief, this brief window of relative openness, though you remain aware even now that anything said in this room could easily find its way, in careful, second-hand form, to ears far beyond this circle by tomorrow afternoon. When the gentlemen eventually rejoin the ladies, the room's energy shifts once more, conversation growing slightly more formal again, though not without its own gentle, comfortable warmth. You find yourself, toward the evening's end, seated near a window with a small group of your own age, the conversation drifting easily between music, books, carefully, only the approved variety, and the small, pleasant gossip of the neighborhood. The weight of reputation. By the time your carriage finally carries you home, the night grown properly dark and cold around you, you find your thoughts drifting, as they so often do at the end of a long day, toward the quiet, constant weight that governs every single hour of your existence in this world. Reputation. It occurs to you, watching the dark countryside slide past the carriage window, that you have not had a single unobserved moment since waking this morning. Every word, every glance, every small gesture has been performed under the careful, watchful attention of someone. Your maid, your mother, your chaperone, the dozens of guests and hostesses whose good opinion you have spent the entire day carefully cultivating. Even now, in the privacy of a darkened carriage, your mother sits beside you, quietly reviewing the day's small events, offering gentle observations about what went well and what might be improved upon next time. You know, of course, that this constant observation serves a purpose. A woman's reputation in this world is not simply a matter of personal pride. It is the very foundation upon which her entire future rests. A single misstep, a single ill-considered word or gesture carries the potential to unravel years of careful cultivation, closing doors that, once shut, rarely reopen. And so the vigilance, exhausting as it is, exists for a reason you understand intellectually even as you feel its weight pressing, quietly, on every hour of every day. Still, there is something in you, a small, private part of yourself rarely given voice, that wonders sometimes what it might feel like to move through a single day without this constant, careful calculation, to laugh without measuring the sound, to speak an actual opinion without first considering its social consequences, to simply exist for even a few hours without an audience. You do not dwell on this thought for long. It is not a productive one, not in this world, and you have learned over the years to set such musings aside as gently and efficiently as you set aside an unwanted calling card. The carriage rocks onward through the darkness, carrying you back toward home, toward another quiet, familiar night of unlacing and rest before tomorrow's obligations begin their steady, unbroken procession once more. Evening reflection. Back in your room at last, your maid helps you out of your dinner gown with the same practiced efficiency she brings to every evening's undressing, and you feel, once again, that small, welcome relief as your stays finally loosen, and your lungs draw a full, unhindered breath for the first time in hours. You sit at your vanity as she brushes out your hair, watching your own reflection in the candlelight, and find yourself, as you so often do at this quiet hour, replaying the day's small moments, the careful curtsy at Lady Harrington's, the soup course navigated without incident, the warm, unguarded laugh shared with the other women in the drawing room after dinner. Small victories mostly, the kind that would seem entirely unremarkable to anyone outside this world, and yet each one carries real weight within it. Your maid finishes her work and bids you good night, retreating to her own small alcove, and you climb into bed at last, pulling the blankets up around you in the quiet darkness. Tomorrow will bring its own fresh set of obligations. Another round of calls, perhaps, or preparations for the next assembly, or simply another long, careful day of navigating the countless small rules that govern every moment of a Regency woman's existence. But tonight, at least, in this brief window between one day's performance and the next, you allow yourself to simply rest, spine finally free of its careful discipline, expression finally free of its practiced composure, nothing left to perform for anyone but the quiet darkness of your own room. It is, in its own small way, the only truly private moment your entire day has offered, and you settle into it gratefully, feeling sleep begin to pull gently at the edges of your thoughts, carrying you, at last, toward rest. Morning arrives again, gentler this time, the household settling into the familiar rhythm of a day with no grand ball to anchor it, only the smaller, steadier obligations that fill the space between one significant event and the next. Today brings a visit to the milliner's shop in the nearby town, an errand that sounds, on the surface, like simple leisure, and that proves, as so many things do in this world, to be rather more complicated than it first appears. You dress in a practical but attractive walking gown, your bonnet chosen with care even for so ordinary an outing, and set off with your mother and a maid in attendance, the small party making its way along the town's main street toward the shop's familiar striped awning. The bell above the door announces your arrival with a cheerful, incongruous brightness, entirely at odds with the quiet tension that settles over you the moment you step inside. The shop itself is a small paradise of ribbon and lace, bonnets arranged along shelves and stands in every imaginable shade, the air fragrant with new fabric and lavender sachets tucked discreetly among the displays. Under ordinary circumstances, this might be a purely pleasant errand, but bonnet selection, you have learned through painful past experience, is never simply a matter of personal taste. It is a small, delicate exercise in social navigation, one that requires you to consider not only what suits you, but what has already been chosen by others, what colors carry unspoken associations within your particular social circle, and what a given choice might suggest about your family's means, your personal ambitions, and your general good sense. The milliner greets you warmly, already well versed in the particular anxieties of her clientele, and begins presenting a selection of the season's most fashionable options. A cream bonnet trimmed with delicate embroidered flowers catches your eye immediately, its understated elegance seeming to strike precisely the right balance between fashionable and appropriately modest. You lift it toward the small mirror to judge its effect, turning your head slightly to catch the light, and feel a small flush of genuine pleasure at how well it suits you. Before you can settle the matter, however, the shop's bell chimes again, and you feel your stomach tighten reflexively even before turning to see who has entered. It is, as you half suspected it might be, a young woman from your own social circle, pleasant enough in most contexts, but possessed of a particular talent for making even the most ordinary interactions feel subtly competitive. She glances toward the bonnet in your hands, and something flickers briefly across her expression before smoothing back into polite neutrality. "How lovely," she says, her tone carrying just enough ambiguity to leave you genuinely uncertain whether she means the compliment sincerely or is quietly registering, for future reference, that you have chosen something she herself might have wanted. The milliner, sensing the delicate undercurrent, mentions, with what might be entirely innocent helpfulness or might be a small strategic intervention, that this particular young woman had admired a very similar style just yesterday. You set the bonnet down with careful, unhurried casualness, murmuring something about wanting to consider a few other options first, though the small, private disappointment of the moment registers clearly enough beneath your composed exterior. It is, you reflect, a peculiar kind of exhaustion, The constant necessity of weighing even the smallest personal preference against its potential social consequences never quite permitted the simple pleasure of choosing something purely because you like it. You move on to examine a straw bonnet trimmed with pale green ribbon, turning it over in your hands while your mother offers a quiet opinion from nearby, and eventually, after several more minutes of careful deliberation, settle on a third option entirely, a soft blue bonnet with modest trim, distinctive enough to feel like a genuine choice, unremarkable enough to avoid drawing any unwanted comparison or comment. It is not, perhaps, the bonnet you wanted most, but it is, in the careful calculus of this world, the bonnet that causes the least difficulty. And you have learned, over years of practice, that this particular calculation often matters rather more than simple preference. A walk through the gardens the afternoon brings an invitation to walk through the grounds of a neighboring estate, an outing that sounds, in its description, thoroughly pleasant, fresh air, pretty gardens, gentle exercise after a morning spent largely indoors. In practice, as with so much else in this world, the walk carries its own quiet undercurrent of purpose, one you understand perfectly well even before setting a single foot on the garden path. You are joined, as you rather expected to be, by the same young gentleman whose company you enjoyed at the recent ball. His attendance at today's gathering feeling, in retrospect, rather less coincidental than it first appeared. Your chaperone falls into step a discreet but attentive distance behind the two of you as you set off along the gravel path, the late afternoon sun casting long, soft shadows across the neatly trimmed hedges on either side. Conversation begins, as it so often does, with the garden itself, a comment on the roses currently in bloom, an observation about the skill of the estate's gardener. Safe, pleasant, entirely unremarkable topics, chosen deliberately for their harmlessness. And yet beneath the surface of this careful small talk, you sense the quiet, deliberate current of something else entirely. Two people, walking side by side beneath careful supervision, each quietly assessing the other's temperament, character, and suitability, though neither would ever describe the walk in such blunt terms. He asks at one point about your interests, and you offer the familiar, well-worn responses: needlework, music, time spent with family, even as some small, private part of you wishes, briefly, that you might answer more honestly, might speak of the novels hidden inside sermon covers, or the particular restless energy you sometimes feel during long afternoons of enforced stillness. You do not say any of this, of course. It would serve no purpose beyond making both of you uncomfortable, and possibly alarming your chaperone considerably. He offers his arm as the path narrows near a small ornamental pond, and you accept it lightly, your gloved fingers resting against the fine wool of his sleeve, aware, even in this small, ordinary gesture, of your chaperone's watchful presence close behind, ready to intervene at the faintest suggestion of impropriety. You pause together at the pond's edge, watching the late sunlight scatter across its still surface, and for a brief moment, the careful performance of the afternoon softens into something that feels almost like genuine ease. He asks gently which season you favor most, and you find yourself answering with slightly more warmth than strict caution might advise. Autumn, you tell him, for its particular quality of light. He agrees, offering his own small, genuine observation about the season, and for just a moment, walking together beside the quiet pond, the elaborate machinery of Regency courtship seems to fall away entirely, leaving only two people enjoying simply one another's company. The moment does not last, of course. Your chaperone's footsteps draw slightly closer, a gentle but unmistakable signal, and the two of you resume your walk at the same measured pace as before, conversation settling back into its familiar, careful channels. But something of that brief, unguarded moment lingers with you as you make your way back toward the house, a small, warm memory tucked away alongside the rose from the ball, evidence that even within this world of constant, careful calculation, small moments of genuine connection could still, occasionally, find their way through. A compliment, examined back at the house, Gathered once more in the drawing room before the day's visitors begin to depart, you find yourself the subject of an exchange that requires every ounce of the careful social training you have spent your entire life developing. A woman of considerable standing within the local social circle approaches, her expression carrying the particular bright, sharp quality that experience has taught you to regard with immediate caution. "What a lovely gown," she says, her eyes moving deliberately over the fabric, the cut, the color, in a manner that manages to feel more like an inspection than an admiration. You offer your thanks with careful, measured warmth, already turning the compliment over in your mind, searching for its hidden edges. Compliments of this particular quality, delivered with this particular tone, rarely arrive without some quiet secondary purpose, and you have learned, through long and occasionally painful experience, to listen as much to what is implied as to what is actually said. "Such an unusual shade," she continues, and there, it is the small, deliberate word chosen precisely for its ambiguity. Unusual could mean striking. It could also mean questionable, a polite way of suggesting your choice strays somewhat outside the bounds of conventional good taste. You cannot know for certain which meaning she intends, and she will certainly never clarify, leaving you to navigate the remainder of the exchange with careful, deliberate diplomacy. "Find it rather refreshing," you reply, your tone pleasant but firm, declining to apologize for or defend your choice, simply asserting gently that it was deliberate. She studies you for a moment longer, and something in her expression shifts, not quite warmth, but a kind of grudging acknowledgement, the particular respect this world reserves for someone who has successfully weathered a small social test without visible distress. "You wear it well," she concedes finally, and the small exchange, which lasted perhaps 30 seconds in total, concludes with something approaching genuine, if slightly begrudging, approval. You feel your shoulders ease slightly as she moves on to another conversation, aware, even now, of how much careful calculation went into what appeared, to any casual observer, as nothing more than an ordinary, pleasant exchange of compliments. Letters, carefully composed later that evening before dinner, you find a quiet hour to sit at your writing desk and compose a letter to a dear friend now living several counties away, married just this past spring, and settled into a new household far from the familiar company of her girlhood friends. Letter writing in this world occupies its own particular category of careful performance, less immediately consequential than a public conversation perhaps, but permanent in a way spoken words never are, and therefore requiring, if anything, even greater care. You dip your quill and begin with the customary warm but restrained greeting, inquiring after her health and that of her new household, before moving carefully into the small, curated collection of news you have decided to share. The ball, described in pleasant but measured terms. A brief, careful mention of the young gentleman and his rose, phrased with just enough warmth to convey genuine feeling, without committing anything so definite to paper that it might cause complication, should the letter somehow find its way into unintended hands. You consider briefly writing something more honest, describing the particular exhaustion of constant observation, the quiet loneliness that sometimes settles over you even in the midst of a crowded ballroom, the small, persistent wish for a single hour in which no one is watching or judging or quietly calculating your suitability for anything at all. But letters, you remind yourself, are not truly private. They can be read aloud. They can be shared, quoted, referenced in future conversations by people who were never meant to see them. And so you settle, as you always do, for the careful, curated version of your life, warm enough to feel genuine, restrained enough to reveal nothing that might later cause you difficulty. You close the letter with an affectionate but proper farewell, seal it with a careful drop of wax, and set it aside for the morning post, feeling, as you so often do after these small acts of correspondence, a peculiar mixture of connection and distance, closer, in some sense, to your friend for having written, and yet acutely aware of everything the careful formality of the letter has left unsaid. The weight of watching eyes as the day draws toward its close, You find yourself reflecting, not for the first time, on the sheer constancy of observation that defines your existence in this world. From the moment you wake until the moment you finally close your eyes each night, there is scarcely a single instant in which someone, somewhere, is not quietly assessing your posture, your words, your expressions, weighing each small gesture against the considerable weight of your family's reputation and your own future prospects. It is, you have come to understand, simply the nature of the world you inhabit, not cruelty exactly, though it can certainly feel that way in difficult moments, but rather the natural consequence of a society organized so completely around appearance, alliance, and careful, mutual surveillance. Everyone watches everyone else, because everyone understands implicitly that they too are being watched in turn. It is a system with no true villains, only participants, each playing their careful, practiced role because the alternative, stepping outside the system entirely, carries consequences far too severe to seriously consider. And yet, even within this constant, careful performance, you have found over the years small pockets of genuine connection and even genuine pleasure. The warm, unguarded laugh shared with friends after a formal dinner concludes. The brief, honest exchange with a gentleman beside a quiet garden pond. The small private thrill of a stolen page from a forbidden novel. These moments do not erase the exhausting weight of constant observation, but they make it, somehow, bearable proof that even within the most rigid of social structures, genuine human warmth finds its way through the smallest available cracks. The evening meal that follows brings with it a small trial you had not anticipated, one that tests not your posture or your table manners, but something far more difficult to control: your composure in the face of a deliberately unkind remark. You are seated in the drawing room before dinner is announced, engaged in pleasant conversation with a small circle of acquaintances, when a young woman known throughout the neighborhood for her sharp tongue and sharper instincts approaches, her expression arranged into an expression of polite interest that you have learned, through past experience, rarely bodes entirely well. "What a brave choice of bonnet," she says, her eyes flicking briefly toward the soft blue trim you selected so carefully at the milliner's shop that very morning. The word brave, delivered with just enough emphasis, carries an unmistakable sting beneath its polite surface, a suggestion that your choice was perhaps unwise, perhaps slightly beyond what your position or your taste could properly support. You feel the small, hot flare of indignation rise in your chest, quick and sharp, the kind of reaction that, in any other setting, might prompt a sharp response in kind. But this is not any other setting. This is a crowded drawing room, filled with watchful eyes and listening ears, and you know with absolute certainty that any visible reaction, a flush of anger, a flash of hurt in your expression, even the faintest tightening around your eyes, will be noted, discussed, and very likely repeated in careful, exaggerated form at gatherings throughout the county for weeks to come. And so you do what every young woman in this world learns to do, eventually, through long practice and the occasional painful lesson. You swallow the feeling whole. You lift your teacup with a hand that betrays nothing, take a slow, measured sip, and offer in return a smile so perfectly composed it might have been carved from porcelain. "How kind of you to say," you reply, your voice carrying not the faintest tremor of the storm currently raging somewhere beneath your ribcage. The exchange continues for another moment or two, a few more careful, double-edged remarks exchanged between you, each one delivered and received with identical polite smiles, before the conversation shifts naturally elsewhere, the small skirmish concluding with no clear victor, only the quiet, mutual understanding that a small battle has been fought and for now, set aside. It is only later, alone for a brief moment near the window while dinner is being finalized, that you allow yourself the smallest private release. A slow, controlled exhale, shoulders dropping half an inch before immediately straightening again as another guest approaches. This, you have come to understand, is simply the cost of existing in this particular world. A constant, invisible labor of feeling everything and showing almost nothing. A discipline so deeply ingrained by now that it rarely even registers as effort anymore, except in these small, rare moments when the mask slips just far enough for you to notice the weight of holding it in place. The marriage market as the evening progresses into a small, informal gathering following dinner. The underlying purpose of so much of this world's careful social choreography reveals itself with particular clarity. Mothers position themselves at strategic points around the room, their eyes tracking, with the quiet intensity of generals surveying a battlefield, every small interaction between their daughters and the young men present tonight. Gentlemen drift somewhat awkwardly between conversations, clearly aware, in their own less practiced way, that tonight carries stakes considerably higher than simple pleasant company. You stand near the edge of the room, engaged in light conversation with a small group of your own age, acutely conscious of your own mother's presence nearby, her attention divided between her own conversation and the careful, ongoing surveillance of your interactions. It occurs to you, not for the first time, that very little about tonight's gathering is truly spontaneous. Every conversation, every small laugh, every careful glance exchanged between young people across the room exists within a larger, unspoken framework. The slow, patient, endlessly calculated process of arranging futures. A gentleman approaches, not the same young man from the ball, but another, pleasant enough, if somewhat less immediately engaging, and the two of you exchange the familiar, careful pleasantries that Regency courtship demands. He compliments your gown. You thank him with practiced warmth. He asks after your interests, and you offer the same well-rehearsed responses you have given a dozen times before. It is not an unpleasant conversation, exactly, but it carries none of the small, genuine spark you felt beside the garden pond earlier this week, and you find yourself, even as you maintain every outward appearance of pleasant engagement, quietly comparing this exchange to that other, warmer one. Across the room, you catch sight of the young man from the ball, currently engaged in conversation with another young woman, and feel a small, unexpected flicker of something that might, if you allowed yourself to examine it too closely, resemble jealousy. You do not allow yourself to examine it too closely. Such feelings, however natural, carry no useful place in this careful, calculated evening, and you redirect your attention back to your current conversation with practiced discipline. Near the room's edge, your mother catches your eye briefly, offering the smallest, most subtle of nods, an acknowledgement you understand immediately of the current conversation's general suitability, delivered without a single word needing to pass between you. This is simply how information travels in this world, not through direct instruction, but through countless small, coded gestures, absorbed and understood almost instinctively by everyone raised within this particular careful, watchful culture. By the time the evening finally draws to its close, you have exchanged pleasant words with perhaps 4 or 5 different young gentlemen, danced no actual dances tonight, but participated instead in the quieter, subtler choreography of careful conversation and calculated proximity. Tomorrow, small fragments of tonight's interactions will circulate through the neighborhood in whispered, second-hand form who spoke with whom, for how long, with what apparent warmth each fragment weighed, and considered by mothers and matrons throughout the county as they continue their slow, patient work of arranging the futures of an entire generation of young people. The quiet hours home again at last, and finally alone in the privacy of your own room, you sit at your vanity while your maid works through the familiar, welcome ritual of unlacing your stays and unpinning your hair, and allow your mind to drift back over the sheer accumulated weight of the day, the bonnet shop, the garden walk, the sharp remarks so carefully absorbed and deflected, the quiet, calculated conversations of tonight's gathering. It strikes you, as it often does during these quiet evening hours, just how much invisible labor fills a single day in this world. To an outside observer, your life might appear, on its surface, remarkably leisurely: visits, walks, needlework, the occasional ball or dinner party, none of it resembling anything close to genuine hardship. And yet you know, better than anyone, the constant, exhausting vigilance required simply to move through these apparently pleasant activities without misstep, the endless calculation hidden beneath every smile, every careful word, every measured gesture. Your maid finishes her work and bids you good night, and you climb into bed at last, pulling the blankets close around you in the quiet darkness of your room. Somewhere outside, an owl calls softly across the dark countryside, entirely unconcerned with curtsies or calling cards or the careful, coded language of fans and flowers. And you find yourself, as you drift toward sleep, entertaining the same small, familiar fantasy that visits you on nights like this one. A brief, wistful wondering at what it might feel like to move through even a single day entirely free of watching eyes. You do not dwell on the thought for long. Sleep comes gently, gradually, pulling you down into rest despite the accumulated weight of the day's small performances. And tomorrow, you know, will bring its own fresh set of obligations. Another day of careful curtsies, measured conversation, and the endless, quiet discipline of appearing, always perfectly composed. Looking back, there is something almost impossible, from the comfortable distance of the present day, to fully understand the particular texture of a life lived so entirely under observation. Every gesture calculated, every word weighed, every private feeling carefully folded away beneath a composed and pleasant exterior. And yet, looking closely at the details of this world, something else becomes visible too. Not simply restriction, but resilience. Not simply constraint, but a remarkable, quiet resourcefulness, young women finding small pockets of genuine connection and private freedom within even the most rigid of social structures. A stolen page of a forbidden novel here, a warm, unguarded laugh there. A single rose carried carefully home and treasured long after the evening that produced it has faded into memory. These women navigated a world with no written rulebook, only the accumulated, whispered wisdom passed down from mother to daughter, friend to friend, generation to generation. An entire intricate architecture of etiquette, absorbed almost by instinct, and carried quietly through every waking hour of every single day. It was, in its own particular way, its own kind of discipline, its own kind of strength, even if it rarely resembled anything the modern world would recognize as such. And so, as you lie here now, wherever and whenever you happen to be listening, free of stays and curtsies and the endless, careful calculation of a Regency drawing room, perhaps allow yourself a small measure of quiet gratitude for the freedom to breathe deeply without apology, to speak your mind without weighing every word against an invisible, ever-watching audience, to simply exist in this ordinary moment without performance. Let your shoulders soften now, wherever they've been holding tension. Let your breathing slow, deep, and easy, free of any corset's quiet insistence. The candles of that long-ago drawing room have burned down to nothing. The carriages have long since carried their passengers home. The whispered gossip of that particular evening has dissolved, centuries ago, into silence. There is nothing left to perform tonight. No curtsy to measure, no fan to angle just so, no careful sentence to weigh before it leaves your lips. Just this quiet moment and the soft, steady sound of my voice beside you, and the gentle, welcome pull of sleep drawing you down gradually into rest. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next one.